So today we want to finish up with this piece of the SportsStore. Remember, with what we put in yesterday, we put in the admin controller so that you could kind of create products and edit them and work with them. But right now, that's wide open to the internet. Anybody who goes to the website could go get to the admin controller and go change data. We want to prevent that. So we want to create some sort of login that will prevent that from going in there. So if you would, please open up your SportsStore application. Beginning in chapter 12. Evan? Yes. Put that on pause if you would. So one thing to know, the tool that we're going to use today is something called Forms Authentication. It is a tool that's officially, at this point, it's deprecated. Okay, so it's not the tool that's recommended, but the tool that is kind of the current thing does have some things in common with this tool. So it will give you kind of a start to see some of those pieces. We'll talk more about what's called Identity Framework, which is the kind of the current recommended Microsoft tool for managing accounts and things like that. We'll talk about that in a few weeks. There's additional set of 3 chapters that is provided from a different book that we'll look at when we get there. So if you look on the main rank and page under handouts, you'll see here this ASP.NET Identity Framework handout. That's chapters 13, 14, 15 from the other book that has the stuff about the Identity Framework. So the chapter 12 does mention those chapters. We have them, and we'll go through those when we get to actually talking about users and such. Questions about that? Okay. So we're going to start with that. So the first thing we need to do is open up our web config. Okay. Now there's a lot of code in this XML file here that we're showing. The only thing we need to write is this one tag here called Authentication, and we need to make sure we put that under the system web tag. Okay. Different tags in the web config allow for different kinds of settings. So we need to open that one up. So going up to the web config, again I'm going to go to the one in the root, not the one in the views folder. Here's the system web section right here. So I'm going to add to the end of that, I'm going to add this authentication tag. So the whole point of this is to configure how we want those user accounts to work. Okay. Once we get into using Identity Framework, we'll set this up differently, but this is the way we're going to set it up right now to use Forms Authentication. Now, if you type in mode equals, you'll see that there's a few different options there. Okay. So you have Forms, which is the one we're going to use. You'll also notice that there's Windows. Windows would mean that you're using Windows credentials, the Windows credentials that you have on your computer, or would be if you're using, what's it called? Active Directory. That would be if you're using Active Directory for your system. Generally, Windows only gets used for internal systems. So like if you're only using it at your company and your company's accounts are what's determining whether or not you can use the system, that's where you would use it. But Forms is something that works for external users logging in. Okay. There's also Federated. Federated is something that works if you have kind of multiple sites that kind of need to use the same login system. That's what that exists there for. But Forms is the one we want to look at today. So we're going to set that. And then inside of here, I need to configure where the login page is. So for Forms, I'm going to say that the login URL is going to be account So the way that's going to work is anytime you go to a page where you need to be logged in, you're going to get automatically redirected to this login page. That makes sense? It'll redirect you to login page. Once you log in, it'll redirect you back to where you were. So I need to set the login URL. I also want to set a timeout. And the timeout that he puts in here is that 2880. That's equivalent to 48 hours because this is in minutes. That's probably a lot longer session than you would want for a real world system. You probably don't want to leave a user logged in for 48 hours. But for our purposes here, that'll be fine, especially since it's only going to be one user. Okay. Now, in a real world setting, I probably would want to let there be multiple accounts in here and have them somehow configured in a database, and I'd want to make sure that those passwords are encrypted in the database. But for the sake of this example, I'm actually just going to hard code the login credentials into the web config. Okay. Bad idea in general, but it'll make setting things up here easier. So inside of the forms tag, I'm going to add in a section called credentials. Password format is going to be clear. You'll notice that there's some other formats there. If you were using this for real, you definitely want to use one of those other options, and that tells it how you've encrypted the password that you put here. But for now, we're just going to put it clear text. Okay. Inside of there, I'm going to add a user. So that user is going to have a name of admin and their password of secret. So just to clarify, that whole authentication tag is what you need to add. So that's enough to set that up. So we'll have a user with name admin, password secret, and now we can get into actually limiting who can get to the admin controller. So we'll want to limit that first, and then we also have to put in the actual login screen. So to limit who can get there, I want to go to the admin controller, and at the top of the class, I'm going to add in another attribute. So authorize is the name of the attribute. Okay. Okay. This particular attribute is what we call a route filter. What it does is there's some code in this attribute that actually gets run before your action method. So these filter attributes actually give us a way to run code that's kind of standard that we want to reuse, but run it before your action method code actually runs. Now, any of these route filters, we have two options. So we can either put them on the class, or you can put them on the method. If I put it on the method, it only applies to that particular action. Does that make sense? So if I only put it here, it only applies to the index action. Everything else is still wide open to the internet. What putting it on the class does, effectively putting on the class, is the same as putting it on every method. So once I put it on the class, now it applies to every page in that controller. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the safe way to go about it to make sure I don't miss anything. You know, maybe I need to add some more functionality, and I don't want to accidentally open that up to the internet because I forgot to add the attribute, right? So I'm going to put that on there to say everything in here you have to be logged in for. So the authorized tag at this, like as such, says you have to be logged in order to use this system. Okay? It doesn't do any checking more than that. right? So if we wanted to do something where we say only admins, right? Maybe we have regular customers also in the system in the future. We maybe want to have them to be able to do stuff with their shopping cart, buy things, and have accounts, but not be able to change the products. Well, we need to do a little bit more there, and what that's going to look like, we'll get there when we get there. There's some settings you can set on here. So I could say roles equals admin, right? So if I only wanted admins to be able to get to this, that's how I would actually configure that, okay? But for now, we only have one account. That account is an admin, so I don't need to worry about roles as of yet. Does that make sense? Okay. So in the future, you'll see that. But for now, I'm just going to put authorized to say you just have to be logged in. Okay. So let's run this. Let's see what we have so far. Okay. So because I've only added that authorize attribute to the admin controller, all the other functionality works. All the other functionality you can get to just fine. I do have a problem I need to fix there.
It's a 2-string.
It is. Okay, let me go fix that. So that was under which file? That was under
Cart index.
cart index. So let's look at that. That looks like something I changed yesterday and didn't fix. So under cart index, there it is. Okay. So if I just change this, I thought I'd changed this yesterday, but maybe I didn't.
I think there was like 2 other ones that you changed, and then this is the 3rd one.
Yeah.
I missed it on mine. That was yesterday.
Yeah. Fixed. Okay, switch over template string, problem fixed. Okay, so I can get to all of the checkout process, I can get to the cart, all that I can do without being logged in. But as soon as I go to the admin controller, so type in /admin, I'm going to get a page. Wait a second. I must not have the right project open. What project am I in? That's interesting. Oh, right, okay. So when I go to admin, sorry, I missed the sign. So I'm going to go to /admin. It's immediately redirecting me to account login, and you can see the return URL here is set to /admin. So when I finish logging in, it would send me back here. But remember, we haven't created an account controller yet, so this account login page doesn't exist. So it's like, I don't know where that is. So we need to actually go create that. So the first step to creating that login page is that we need to actually create a view model for it. Okay, so I'm going to call that the login view model. So under models, I'm going to add a new class. I'm going to call that a login view model. Again, it's a view model simply because it doesn't refer to any table that we have in our database right now.
What folder did you create that in?
Under models. Okay. So this file is going to be very simple. I just need a username and a password. So public string username. Okay. Both of these fields are required, so I'm going to mark them as such. And we also talked about the data type attribute yesterday. So I'm going to add that in here as well to specify that this is a password and should be treated as such.
Where else did we use that attribute?
I also used that to specify that we had multi-line text.
Oh,
Remember
right.
yesterday? So that's the other one. There's a few different data types in there that are worth knowing about. So username and password, that's our model. Yep.
Does that hash the password, or is that?
It won't actually hash the password. All it does is if I use the editor for HTML helper, it'll show it as a password field instead of a text box. Okay. It doesn't take care of hashing it. That's something we still have to do ourselves. It's still sent between your website and the browser. It's still going to be sent as plain text, even with this. Okay. So I've created that model. I'm going to now create the controller. So we're going to call that the account controller. I won't actually be using any sort of database for this, so I'm just going to create one action method called login. Actually, I need two. I'm going to have one that's the get format, and one for the post.
When I try creating the account controller, it's giving me an error.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
What error is it giving you?
The value of -1 is outside the acceptable range.
Yeah.
Okay. Do this. Hit OK on that dialog. Hit cancel. Go to build and do a clean and then a rebuild just to see if that fixes things. So clean solution and then try rebuild solution and see if that makes the error go away.
Rebuild SportsStore.
Yeah. You still okay? No, you're fine. So try it. Same thing.
Yeah, getting an error again.
I don't know how that is even related to what you're trying to do. Same good Visual Studio Studio. Just trying to use cancel. So let's close all of this. And let's just try to restart Visual Studio.
Try to restart.
If you're getting that error, are you going to say that?
Yeah. Does it have to do with maybe the negative numbers from yesterday?
Shouldn't. I don't think so. I mean, just, I don't, as far as I know, it shouldn't. I'd more likely speculate is it's a case of if it was still open from yesterday, if you never shut it down yesterday, or if there was some sort of update to Visual Studio. That's very odd. Do you shut down all your Visual Studios just to make sure that you're starting from a clean slate?
Okay, now it worked for
Okay.
after you started.
probably should again, but it should, I think.
What? Dude, we're still stuck $100 for you.
Yeah.
If you book the power in?
It's gonna be freaking awesome. Honestly, I would like to get this weekend too.
Dude, it was awesome.
Where you sitting?
I'm convinced my dad to buy this.
I don't know, it's like pretty high up. Oh, the other seats are like.
I was regular, season tickets, and they have like a cruise club, which is kinda nice, because there's like a bar up there.
Yeah.
Yours worked if you shut off during your time.
But there's this one guy, he's like a veteran, he's had season tickets for like 40 years, and he's right now. But he's so old, so he doesn't go to a lot of games. He's
Yeah.
just trying to get his tickets to the first
Yeah,
seats.
that's awesome.
I've only got him like twice.
That's it. What's the full contract?
Yeah.
Going on next Saturday.
Is that first or second?
I'm still getting two.
What?
So really, it turned out we closed the other tabs, and somehow that fixed it. We just having those other records.
All the tabs at the top.
All the tabs at the top. Somehow that was a problem. Don't ask me how, but somehow having all those tabs open was a problem. Okay, so we've got the account controller started here. So I need a get version, and I need a post version. For the post version of this, it needs to take that view model. So it's going to be login, view model. As the first parameter. I also want to add in that return URL. Because that return URL is where we're going to send them back to once they log in. Okay. So we're going to say if So just as previously, we want to say if it's not valid, then just send them back to the view. And then we want to start putting in our logic that's going to check that username and password that they provided us with. Now, the class that we're going to use for that is one called Forms Authentication. The way you can look up that documentation, the documentation for that class, type into your browser. If you type in Forms Authentication, you should see more than likely this result come up first. Forms Authentication class that's on docsmicrosoft.com. If we go and look at this, so this will give us kind of a, tell us all the methods and the properties that are part of this class. So the two methods that we want to use for this are Authenticate, just down here. So Authenticate takes a username and password, and the other method that we're going to need to use is set auth cookie. Okay, so set auth cookie is going to keep track, it's going to set a cookie so we can keep track that they're logged in. So we don't have to show them the login box again until they log out. And Authenticate is how we're going to check that those username and passwords are correct.
Is that set off cookie also incorporate the timeout time that we put in?
Yes. Yeah, so there'll be a timeout on that cookie as well. So the first method that we have here is Authenticate, You can see that it's a static method. You can see it returns a bool. You can see it takes a name and password. If we look here, we can see, okay, returns true if they're valid, false otherwise. So let's hook that up. So I'm going to say else if forms authentication.
Does it really need to be an else if since you're returning something in the if?
Not no, because there's gonna be three. Well, in some case, yes. It doesn't need to be, although I would do it this way just for readability's sake. It's usually still recommended to do that way, even though it's going to be the same. So I want to say authenticate, and then I'm going to say I want to pass in the username and the password. Okay. Now you'll see that there's a red, a green underline on that. That note is saying, hey, by the way, forms authentication is obsolete. Please don't use it. Which, okay, true. We probably don't want to use it, but this gives us a starting point. It's a simple tool to kind of get started before we bring in the more sophisticated tool, which is identity framework and requires quite a bit more setup than forms of authentication to get it working. So that's why we want to push it off a little bit, because it takes quite a bit more work to get that set up.
It says add obsolete. Will that do anything?
Says show potential fixes. Well, all that does, it adds this tag up here. All that really does is says, well, don't show me the warning. It doesn't fix anything. It just says, don't tell me that it's obsolete. That's kind of a bad thing to do, because then you don't know that you have code in there that's like, oh, I probably should be doing something different. So it makes the warning go away, but it doesn't really solve the problem. It just makes it disappear. So I'm actually not gonna, I'm gonna just leave that as is. Okay. So in that case, we want to get logged in. Otherwise would be, hey, your username and password's invalid, right? So if your username and password's invalid, then we want to show them the view again. But we also want to be able to tell them that there is a problem. So in there, I'm going to say model state .add model error. So if they provide me with an invalid username and password, then we're going to tell them, hey, this is not valid. Please give me valid credentials. Okay. In this case, if they do give me valid credentials, that's where I need to set that cookie. So the first thing I want to do in there, I'm going to say forms authentication .set auth cookie. That takes two parameters. So the first one is the username, and the next parameter is a boolean that says, do you want this to be a quote-unquote persistent cookie? Okay, persistent cookie meaning that do you want this cookie to stick around after they shut the browser down? Do you want this cookie to stick around if they shut the browser down or not? Well, we ideally don't want to have it stick around when the browser shuts down, so we're going to tell it false. Don't make it persistent. Okay. And the next thing I need to do, now that I've done all that, I want to redirect them back to where they were originally. So I'm going to say return, redirect, and we're going to redirect them to that return URL. Now, it's possible that they navigated directly to the account login page and they don't have a return URL. It's possible that they don't have a return URL. If they don't have a return URL, we want to give them a fallback. So we're going to say URL.action, and we're going to send them back to the index, the admin index page. So if we don't have a return URL, we're going to send them back to the admin index page. Questions there on the controller? So that's all we have to do as far as forms authentication is we care about. As far as setting up the login, you say authenticate, and then if those are correct, you set the cookie. And remember, the key part of that is this authorized attribute. Okay, that authorized attribute we're still gonna be using that. Even that authorized attribute works with actually any version of login system that we can use. So you want to keep that one in the back of your mind, because that's the one we will be using regardless of which kind of authentication you're using. That one still works. It's this part that's going to change. So we've got that set up. What are we still missing? We've got a model, we've got a controller. We still need what? We still need a view. Okay, so let's go to account, the views account folder, and let's create a new view. Okay, our login. I want to call that login. So I'm going to leave it as empty template. I'm going to use that layout page. Actually, I want to use the admin. I want to use that admin layout for this. So I'm going to go to shared and pick the admin layout, because I want this view to actually show up with that admin layout. So that's going to give me a starting point like this. So what I want to do, I'm going to actually make this one look very similar to the way that we've styled the other two. So if I go here, I'm going to have that same header and a similar, oh, I don't need, well, I do want a footer. So I'm going to have a similar footer to that. Okay. So I want to create a form using HTML.begin form. Grab I want to sort that out the same way. So I'm going to have validation summary at the top, so I can show any errors that you have. Like if you haven't filled in a username or the password, I'm going to have that show up there, as well if you've entered incorrect credentials. Okay, inside of this div is where I'm going to start adding the controls. So we're going to say div, this is going to be class form-group. open up the version of this that I already have written. Just make sure I'm following along with what I planned. Views. Okay. So under form group, I want to add the label. So I'm going to do HTML.label4. Oh, I haven't added the model. So I need to say that the model is that login view model. So label for username, HTML.textbox4, so that's my username. I want to add in the password. Now, if I leave this as text box 4, remember that that's going to just show the text, the characters, as you write them out. I'm going to change that over to password 4, so that it's going to hide the actual characters as I type them. Okay, I also need a submit button, so I'm going to add that below. Let's see if this works. So I'm at account login. Oh, I missed form control. I missed the form control class. So I need new class form control. There. That's what I wanted. Make both of them look like the input boxes I want. Okay. So let's give that a try now. So on the account login page, that's the way I want it to look. But just for testing purpose, I'm going to go to /admin. Now you can see it's redirected me to account login and it's working. I've got my return URL up there. And let's try leaving both of these blank and seeing what happens. So if I leave both of these blank, I can see the error message popping up. That's what I should see. If I then fill in something incorrectly, you're going to see that it says incorrect username and password. Now, I think I missed something because the password's getting cleared out. Let me just check if I change.
How do you get to that login screen?
Go to /admin.
Actually, usually, most sites usually when you incorrect the type of password, it usually clears out the field.
I think it does. I think that what I did miss though, in the account controller, I don't think I passed the model back, although it's probably fine. I'm just curious. Yeah, well, I'll just leave it as is. So, yep.
Mine is not working. Getting 4-4.
Yeah, I'm getting 4 as well.
If you go to admin,
It's because you don't have the index in there. So yeah, I think you go directly to the.
no, because we changed the route config yesterday.
Oh right.
So that's what you're getting.
Oh, it's used to be logged.
This needs to be logged in. Yeah. Who's on the index? Yeah, make sure go into your account controller.
Okay.
Make sure that both of your action methods are named login.
Oh, that index.
Index.
I don't know. Restart. Would you say with the login index? Or
Go to your account controller. You see, this is still called index, so there's no login.
oh, it's
Has to be login.
no,
You have to actually, well, you don't have to exit out, but you have to run it again because you need to change something. Are you working? Just hit execute.
It's a little bit. Why is it so small?
You're also missing the place there. Let's see. Where's this? Go back there. It was a semicolon. There. Semicolon. Okay, that's fine. So to make that error go away, just close it.
You didn't take it to that,
Do a
right?
clean solution.
No, I'm on Saturday.
Oh, you're on Saturday.
Should be gone. It just hadn't successfully built. Okay. So you should be able to get in here. Again, leaving it blank should give you the wrong thing. If I type in invalid credentials, what you should be seeing is that incorrect username password message. If I go ahead and enter admin secret, which is that login that we set up, admin secret, I should get through and get in here.
There was a bug on MacBooks where you could type that into the user account and then it would log in.
Aye.
Okay, so if we were to relaunch this,
Uh-huh.
and we went straight to wrote this URL into the products page, it would give us what? Like what would happen?
What do you mean?
So, the idea is that this products page shouldn't be viewable until you log in.
Mm-hmm.
And if we
Correct.
went into a URL and typed in whatever slash, well, I don't know what the URL is, I can't remember what the URL is, to this page specifically.
To admin, right?
It's just admin.
Right,
Oh,
slash
so that
admin.
makes you admin actually takes us to the login first. Okay, I see what.
Right, right. By typing in /admin, it took us to the login page because we weren't logged in yet.
So then, my follow-up question to that is, because of the cookie,
Mm-hmm.
if we were to go to like product list and then we put back into /admin,
Mm-hmm.
it would take us back to.
No, so I'm logged in now. I'm logged in now. So as long as I go through the admin controller,
Okay.
I'm logged in now as long as I have that cookie. Okay.
Okay,
For the next
cool.
48 hours.
For the
Right,
next
that's
48
that's what
hours,
I figured.
right.
I was just trying to clarify that.
You had a hand up?
I'm getting 404 error on once it signs in as well.
For fair error on.
When it tries to sign into the account. So,
See, it's trying to go to account admin. So redirect or something, right? Okay. This needs to be redirect, not redirect to action. That's your problem. Yeah. So in this case, redirect action, remember, says I've given you the action name and controller. I want to go here. What we have here is a URL. If you want to redirect to a URL, you need to use redirect instead of redirect action. So typically you're going to use redirect action, except when you have a URL. That's where you use just redirect. Now I can look at the cookie. I've got a plugin installed in Chrome here called Edit This Cookie, and what this let me do, I can click on here and I'll kind of see the cookies that are already there, right? So you'll see for this particular website, I already have 4 different cookies. Okay, the one I'm interested in here, this is ASPX auth. So this is the cookie that's actually governing the fact that I'm logged in. Okay, now if I look here, you can kind of see the values kind of encrypted.
Or how did you get to that screen?
This is a plugin.
Oh.
This is a plugin I have in Chrome.
And then is that a PGP login? Or no? Never mind.
Okay, well, so here's the cookie that it's saying. There's the actual data. But if I look at, here's the expiration date. So what's the expiration date?
48 hours.
That's not 48 hours, because
Alright,
that's
I was just
2020, right?
Full year.
Full year. So that cookie isn't really keeping track of the 48 hours, is it?
No.
Right? That 48 hours is actually really enforced by ASP.NET, is tracking that 48 hours. The cookie that it issued me is actually a lot longer than that. Okay, now if I want to delete this cookie, I can just go up here. I'm going to delete all these cookies. Done. Let me try to go to admin again, and you'll see now I have to log in again. Okay. Does that make sense? So that's how that works out. As long as I have that cookie, I don't have to log in again. And that keeps it, and anybody on the internet from getting in there, as long as assuming you have a decently secure password, probably better than secret.
Well, that's a great password.
So that's it as far as what I wanted to go over for chapter 12. The rest of it we'll go over next week. Are there any questions about that stuff, about logging in and such?
Yeah, the thing we added into web config, that went into system.web, right?
Correct. Yes, that went into the system.web. I will say this. So I have kind of started on the hands-on test for Monday next week, and kind of roughing that out. So do expect this particular piece is going to be on that hands-on test where I'm going to want you to have an admin login. So I'm going to give you some starter code for it, but it is going to be to kind of build basically a one-page sort of website thing. Do expect the database to be in there. Do expect it to have, I think, 2 tables is the way I've structured it out so far. But yeah, so the part to know there, this is the bit of code that you have to add in there to make this formula authentication work, is under the system web tab.
How are you gonna grade it with databases on each computer? Like,
What do you mean?
Like, since doesn't the database save on each computer? So.
But when I test it, I'll test it against my own database.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I test it, I'll test it against my own database that I'm going to run on my computer. That makes sense.
Also for the portfolio one, you should have a script that adds all of the data to the database. So
Right.
You just have to run it then, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I'm going to do that, is the plan. Yep.
Going off that note, so when we're writing those scripts, I just did 3 separate scripts for each table.
I want that all as one script.
Okay, so to kind of put that all into one script, do you just so you have your insert in the table name, then the columns, and then you put all that data, and then below all that data, you just do another insert into. Okay.
Yep. So if you have 3 different tables you're going to insert into, so you definitely need 3 different insert statements.
Okay. That's what I figured.
So.